the transformation of individuality into uniformity. By the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Gustave Le Bon. One of the most fascinating, and perhaps unsettling, insights offered by Gustave Le Bon is how the presence of the crowd erases the uniqueness of the individual. In the solitary mind, there exists complexity, values, opinions, contradictions, and reflection. But in the crowd, this complexity is replaced by uniformity, a shared identity where individual thought is submerged beneath collective emotion. The transformation from individuality to uniformity is not merely symbolic. It is psychological, emotional, and behavioral. It is the process through which crowds operate as one mind, a phenomenon that Le Bon believed lies at the core of mass behavior, and which continues to shape societies, revolutions, and digital communities today. The disappearance of the individual self. When a person enters a crowd, their sense of self begins to dissolve. This is not just a matter of anonymity, it is a psychological transformation. The I becomes we. The individual no longer acts based solely on personal judgment or values, but according to the emotional atmosphere of the group. In the crowd, people often say and do things they would never consider alone. They scream louder, obey faster, and sometimes act with violent passion or blind enthusiasm. This is because the presence of many others gives the illusion of moral and emotional justification. The crowd becomes a new identity, and the individual merges into it without realizing how much of themselves they've lost. Shared beliefs override personal reasoning, crowds demand sameness. This doesn't mean everyone thinks exactly alike, but that dissent is suppressed, and the dominant feeling becomes contagious. Le Bon explains that, in a crowd, a single idea, repeated and emotionally charged, can become absolute truth, regardless of its logic or evidence. In this state, people don't reason independently. Instead, they adopt the collective mood, whether it's fear, anger, pride, or hope, and conform to it. Divergent thinking is not only discouraged, but often met with hostility. Those who resist the shared belief are seen as outsiders, traitors, or enemies. This is how uniformity of behavior and thinking arises. The crowd does not tolerate complexity. It seeks clarity through simplification, and that simplification becomes a rule everyone unconsciously obeys. Symbols, slogans, and myths, the tools of uniformity. To maintain cohesion, crowds rely on symbols and slogans. These are not logical constructs, but emotional anchors. A flag, a chant, a phrase, these can unite millions, not because of their intellectual merit, but because they resonate with a shared emotional narrative. These tools of emotional unification help reduce individual reflection. Instead of asking why, the crowd repeats what it has been told. This ritual repetition creates an emotional bond, reinforcing the idea that everyone thinks the same, and anyone who questions it threatens the unity of the whole. Crowds are also sustained by myths, simplified stories that explain the world and assign moral clarity. These myths don't need to be true. They only need to be believed by enough people, often with religious intensity. The seduction of belonging. Why do people willingly surrender their individuality in crowds? The answer lies in the comfort of belonging. To be part of a crowd is to feel accepted, safe, and empowered. The fear of isolation is deeply human, and the crowd offers a seductive solution: merge your identity with ours, and you will no longer be alone. This need for belonging often outweighs the desire for truth or critical thinking. In fact, the more emotionally charged the crowd, the more difficult it becomes to think independently. Standing alone feels dangerous, even meaningless, while conformity feels rewarding and necessary. Uniformity as power, and as threat, the uniformity created by the crowd can serve powerful purposes. It allows large groups of people to act with unity and speed. In revolutions, social movements, or collective resistance, this cohesion can change history. Uniformity becomes momentum, and momentum becomes power. But this same uniformity can become destructive. It crushes nuance. It silences the minority. It enforces rigid identities and beliefs. When everyone is expected to think the same, there is no room for curiosity, doubt, or ethical questioning. Le Bon warns that the crowd's uniformity often leads to intolerance. Those who do not conform are viewed as threats, not because of what they do, but because of what they represent, difference. And in the psychology of the crowd, difference is danger. Modern crowds and digital uniformity. In Le Bon's time, the crowd was physical, people gathered in public spaces, marching, shouting, and moving as one. But today, digital platforms have created new types of crowds: online forums, hashtags, fandoms, and political tribes. The dynamics are the same, only faster. Social media algorithms amplify crowd behavior by rewarding uniform opinions and punishing nuance. Virality depends on repetition, emotion, and simplification, the exact tools Le Bon associated with crowd psychology. Online, individuality is often replaced by performance of belief, posting what the crowd expects, fearing backlash for stepping outside the norm. In this new age, uniformity spreads at the speed of the internet, and the individual faces a new challenge: how to remain authentic in a world that constantly demands alignment with the crowd. The path to self-awareness and individual responsibility. Le Bon's message is not purely pessimistic. While he details the power of the crowd to strip away identity, he also suggests that awareness is a kind of defense. To resist the pull of uniformity, we must cultivate inner clarity. We must pause before we join the chant and ask ourselves whether we are acting from personal conviction or emotional contagion. We must learn to be alone with our thoughts, to embrace discomfort, and to protect the value of independent thinking, even when it's unpopular. In a world shaped by masses, staying human means remembering what made us individuals in the first place. The formation and dynamics of leaders in crowds. Crowds have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master, whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. Gustave Le Bon. Throughout history, from the rise of empires to the fall of republics, the crowd has been both a builder and a destroyer. Yet rarely does the crowd act without direction. Hidden beneath the roar of the masses, there is often a single voice guiding, inspiring, or manipulating them, the voice of a leader. In Gustave Le Bon's analysis of crowd psychology, the leader plays a pivotal role, not as a rational guide, but as a master of emotional influence. He does not lead with logic. He leads with charisma, instinct, and illusion. Why do crowds need a leader? The crowd is inherently unstable. It is impulsive, emotional, and reactive. It lacks structure, purpose, and coherence. Without a unifying force, it quickly becomes directionless, or worse, self-destructive. This is where the leader steps in. A leader gives the crowd focus. He embodies its hopes, its fears, and its collective will. In many ways, he becomes a mirror, not of individual desires, but of the dominant emotion that unites the crowd. He simplifies their confusion, gives voice to their anxieties, and offers a clear path forward, no matter how irrational or dangerous that path may be. The birth of a leader: instinct over intellect. According to Le Bon, leaders of crowds are rarely the most intellectual or rational minds of their time. Instead, they are intuitive, emotionally expressive, and often fanatical in belief. Their power comes not from superior ideas, but from the force with which they express them. The crowd does not analyze a leader's reasoning, it feels the energy, the certainty, the passion. It responds not to content, but to conviction. These leaders arise naturally when a crowd is searching for meaning or unity. In times of crisis, economic turmoil, or cultural upheaval, the need for a symbolic figure becomes urgent. The crowd wants someone to blame, someone to believe in, someone to follow. Charisma, the leader's secret weapon. At the heart of every influential leader lies charisma, a mysterious yet magnetic quality that inspires devotion. Charisma is not taught, it is felt. It is the ability to command attention, to inspire belief, and to communicate with a force that bypasses logic. A charismatic leader doesn't just speak to the crowd, he seems to speak for them. His words validate their feelings. His presence fills the psychological void of uncertainty. In the eyes of the crowd, he becomes a savior, a prophet, a symbol of truth, even when that truth is built on illusion. Repetition, simplicity, and certainty. To maintain influence, the leader must master three tools: repetition, simplicity, and certainty. Le Bon observed that crowds have short memories and little tolerance for complexity. The leader repeats his message again and again, not to inform, but to ingrain. The message is reduced to slogans, chants, or symbols, making it easy to remember and emotionally powerful. Above all, the leader must appear certain. Doubt is fatal. Even when wrong, a leader who expresses unwavering belief will be followed more loyally than one who admits uncertainty. The crowd craves confidence more than truth. Emotional manipulation, the leader's influence on desire. Crowd leaders do not simply guide behavior, they shape desire itself. By awakening fear, hatred, hope, or pride, they control the emotional currents that move the group. They decide who is the enemy, what is sacred, and what must be done. In many cases, the crowd's morality is rewritten by the leader's words. What was once unthinkable can become heroic if the leader declares it so. This is how revolutions are sparked, how wars are justified, and how masses of ordinary people come to commit extraordinary acts, both noble and horrific. The leader does not force them. He transforms their emotional landscape until they move willingly, even joyfully, in the direction he points. The crowd-leader relationship, symbiotic and dangerous. While the leader commands the crowd, he is also a product of it. He reflects its desires and anxieties. This relationship is symbiotic. The leader needs the crowd's energy to rise, and the crowd needs the leader's voice to feel empowered. But this bond is also fragile. If the leader falters, contradicts himself, or loses emotional control, the crowd may turn on him. Yesterday's prophet can become today's enemy. This volatility makes the relationship inherently unstable, yet also extraordinarily powerful while it lasts. Historical reflections, from Caesar to modern populism. History is rich with examples of crowd leaders, from Julius Caesar rallying the Roman plebs to Hitler's hypnotic speeches to modern populist figures commanding social media masses. What they all share is not political alignment, but emotional control. They knew how to trigger mass loyalty, how to simplify complex issues, and how to offer identity and direction to lost or frustrated populations. Even today, in the age of hyper-connected networks, these patterns repeat. Influencers, political figures, and media personalities rise to prominence not through reasoned debate but through emotional resonance. They speak the crowd's language, fast, simple, passionate, and certain. The illusion of individual choice. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of crowd leadership is the illusion of autonomy. Individuals in the crowd often believe they are acting of their own will, yet their beliefs, emotions, and even memories are being shaped by the leader's narrative. They do not feel manipulated, they feel awakened. And this is what makes charismatic leadership so potent and so dangerous. Le Bon warned that once a leader captures the soul of a crowd, reason becomes powerless. Only the disintegration of belief, or a greater emotional wave, can break the spell. Can the crowd choose wisely? It is tempting to believe that with education, rationality will prevail. But Le Bon reminds us that emotion almost always trumps reason in collective behavior. The crowd does not choose its leader based on merit, but on feeling. This makes crowd leadership a double-edged sword. It can inspire great change or cause great destruction. The true test of a society is not how it resists leaders, but how it ensures that those leaders are held accountable, even when they are beloved. Reduced consciousness and impulsivity. The crowd is always intellectually inferior to the isolated individual, but from the point of view of feelings and actions, it may be better or worse depending on the circumstances. Gustave Le Bon. In the intricate architecture of human psychology, consciousness plays a central role. It is the seat of reason, morality, and personal identity. But in the presence of a crowd, something profound happens. This consciousness begins to dissolve. In its place arises a more primitive state, reactive, impulsive, and emotionally charged. Gustave Le Bon masterfully captured this transformation, revealing how individuals, when submerged in crowds, no longer behave as rational beings, but as fragments of a collective instinct. A descent into the unconscious. When individuals enter a crowd, their awareness of self weakens. Personal responsibility, reflective thought, and moral inhibition begin to fade. This is not because people forget who they are, but rather because the crowd creates an environment where instinct takes over. The individual, normally governed by logic and ethical codes, now acts from a place of pure emotion. Le Bon compares this regression to a kind of hypnosis, a state where consciousness is suspended and suggestions from the environment, especially from leaders, go directly to the subconscious. In this state, the person behaves not as they would alone but as someone under the spell of the crowd's will. Impulsivity as the crowd's default mode. Crowds are not known for deliberation or patience. They act fast. They react without waiting. This is the nature of impulsivity, and it becomes the dominant force within collective behavior. Because reasoning is weakened and emotion heightened, decisions are often made on the spot, driven by the atmosphere, by slogans, or by the leader's energy. Le Bon writes that a crowd can be capable of heroic acts or unspeakable cruelty, depending on the emotion it is swept up in. A crowd may save a stranger from a fire, or burn a building to the ground, with equal enthusiasm. The emotion is what matters, not the logic. The disappearance of fear and consequence. One of the most striking features of crowd behavior is the erosion of fear. Alone, an individual hesitates. They weigh outcomes. They fear punishment or regret. But in a crowd, these restraints vanish. There is a sense of invincibility, an illusion of collective immunity. The more people are involved, the less each one feels personally responsible. This leads to actions that would otherwise be unthinkable. Riots, acts of vandalism, and violent outbursts often stem not from personal malice, but from the momentum of the group. The individual loses the brakes of self-consciousness. In psychological terms, the superego, the inner moral compass, is silenced by the roar of the crowd. The influence of leaders, igniting impulse. Crowds may seem chaotic, but they are often guided, subtly or directly, by a leader figure. This leader does not persuade through argument, but commands through emotion. His or her words act like sparks. In the highly flammable atmosphere of a crowd, one phrase, one gesture, or one symbol can ignite mass action. Le Bon observed that the leader of a crowd often behaves like a magnet, aligning the emotions of the group. Once the leader expresses anger, the crowd feels enraged. Once the leader shows confidence, the crowd feels invincible. Through this emotional synchronization, impulse is amplified. The leader doesn't control the crowd logically, he channels its energy. Rationality is replaced with intensity. In a crowd, truth is not measured by evidence but by how strongly it is believed. This is a key reason why false information or irrational ideas can thrive. It doesn't matter if an idea is true, it only matters if it feels true. The crowd favors emotional resonance over analytical clarity. As a result, even absurd or dangerous ideas can gain traction if they are presented with passion. This makes the crowd highly vulnerable to manipulation, conspiracy, and moral panic. The contagion of impulse, how one becomes many. The behavior of a crowd is contagious. One person shouting can lead to dozens more doing the same. One act of defiance can spark a wave of rebellion. This is not coordinated, it is spontaneous imitation, driven by the unconscious urge to belong, to act with the group, to be part of the moment. This imitation feeds back into the crowd's impulsivity. The more people act, the more others follow. The result is a self-sustaining chain reaction, emotion feeding action and action intensifying emotion. Crowds as temporary moral entities. Le Bon emphasizes that crowds do not have a fixed moral character. They are highly changeable, driven by the dominant emotion of the moment. A peaceful gathering can become violent in minutes, or a fearful crowd can be calmed by a single voice of clarity. Because the crowd's consciousness is reduced, it is more vulnerable to emotional shifts, both positive and negative. This means that crowds are morally fluid. They are not inherently good or evil, but their actions depend entirely on the emotions they are collectively experiencing. Modern parallels, mass behavior in real time. In today's world, reduced consciousness and impulsivity don't only happen in physical crowds. The same psychological mechanisms play out online. A viral trend, a mass boycott, or a digital hate wave can build in seconds. Social platforms function as accelerators for impulsive group behavior. Comment sections become echo chambers. Emotional responses outpace thoughtful ones. When likes and shares reward immediate reactions, the crowd's impulsive nature becomes the standard mode of interaction. We find ourselves constantly reacting to headlines, to images, to influencers, without the pause that consciousness normally provides. The path back to self-awareness. How can we preserve our individuality in a world of constant crowds, physical or digital? The answer lies in reflection and pause. Before we act, speak, or share, especially in moments of collective emotion, we must ask, is this truly my response, or am I swept up in something larger? Being aware of crowd dynamics does not mean isolating ourselves. It means becoming conscious participants, not unconscious imitators. Suggestibility and emotional contagion. The conscious personality of the individual fades away, and the unconscious mind of the race is awakened. Gustave Le Bon: in the heart of every crowd lies a hidden current, invisible, yet powerful, capable of sweeping away logic, individuality, and reason. This current is made of two potent psychological forces, suggestibility and emotional contagion. These forces, acting together, form the foundation of how crowds think, feel, and ultimately act. Gustave Le Bon considered them the most dangerous, and the most fascinating, traits of collective behavior. What is suggestibility? Suggestibility is the crowd's heightened sensitivity to external influences, particularly from strong voices, symbols, or gestures. When an individual is alone, they filter information through logic, memory, and personal experience. But in a crowd, that filter weakens or even disappears. The crowd does not question. It accepts. It absorbs. It reacts. In this heightened state, even the most absurd idea can be adopted as truth if presented with enough conviction or emotion. The crowd becomes like soft clay, ready to be molded by whoever dares to speak loudest and with the most passion. Le Bon's key insight was simple but powerful. In a crowd, suggestion bypasses reason and reaches directly into the subconscious. It doesn't need to be proven. It only needs to be felt. The role of images, symbols, and simple ideas. Crowds do not respond well to complex reasoning or abstract thought. Instead, they crave simplicity, clear, emotionally charged messages that can be understood instantly. Le Bon emphasized that images and symbols are far more effective than words in influencing a crowd. Consider political slogans, national flags, or religious icons. These are not just representations, they are emotional triggers. They condense complex ideologies into a single image that speaks directly to the heart, bypassing the mind. In this way, suggestion works best when it is not explained but simply shown. Emotional contagion, the wildfire effect. If suggestibility is the openness to being influenced, emotional contagion is the mechanism by which that influence spreads. Much like a fire jumping from tree to tree, emotions in a crowd spread rapidly and uncontrollably. One person's fear becomes the crowd's panic. One person's anger becomes collective rage. One cheer becomes a deafening roar. This process is largely unconscious. We do not always realize we are catching someone else's emotion. Our brains are wired with mirror neurons, biological circuits that cause us to mimic the expressions, postures, and feelings of others. In a crowd, this mimicry becomes amplified. The more intense the emotion, the more quickly it spreads. The crowd becomes one body, one mind. When both suggestibility and emotional contagion are at work, the crowd ceases to be a group of individuals. It becomes something new, a psychological organism. This organism has its own instincts, its own desires, and its own logic, which is often irrational and highly reactive. Le Bon described this transformation as a kind of hypnotic state. The individual, under the influence of the crowd, enters a trance-like condition in which critical thinking is suspended. What remains is pure reaction to symbols, to emotions, to the voice of the crowd's chosen leader. The leader as hypnotist. Crowds do not lead themselves. In most cases, they are shaped, even unknowingly, by a leader who understands, either instinctively or deliberately, how to trigger suggestibility and manipulate emotional contagion. This leader does not argue or reason. He commands. He repeats. He invokes powerful imagery and appeals to the collective subconscious. Le Bon notes that leaders of crowds are not necessarily intelligent, but they are intuitive masters of influence. They know how to strike emotional chords, provoke fear or hope, and build unity around shared feelings, not facts. From inspiration to manipulation. There is a thin line between inspiration and manipulation. Emotional contagion can bring people together in solidarity, in peaceful protests, celebrations, or shared grief. But it can also lead to mass hysteria, irrational violence, or blind obedience. The same mechanisms that allow a crowd to sing in unison can also make it chant slogans of hate or destroy property in rage. Understanding these forces does not mean rejecting emotion. It means recognizing how emotion operates in us, especially when we are not aware of it. Modern echoes, social media, and the speed of contagion. In Le Bon's time, the crowd was mostly physical. Today, it is also digital, and far more reactive. Social media has created the perfect environment for emotional contagion to flourish. A single image, tweet, or video can trigger a global wave of outrage, empathy, or excitement within minutes. Algorithms amplify content that sparks emotion. The more provocative, the better. Suggestibility is no longer limited to those physically gathered, it reaches across borders, cultures, and screens. We now belong to digital crowds 24/7, often without realizing it. How to resist emotional manipulation. The first step in resisting emotional contagion is awareness. When we feel suddenly enraged, euphoric, or terrified after seeing a post or hearing a message, we must ask, is this truly my emotion, or am I catching someone else's? Critical thinking acts like a psychological firewall. It does not eliminate emotion, but it gives us space to process, reflect, and choose our response instead of reacting blindly. Le Bon's warning was clear: crowds are necessary, but they are also dangerous. Their energy can build civilizations or destroy them. The key lies in understanding the invisible threads, suggestion and emotion, that bind us when we become one of many. The psychological nature of crowds. In a crowd, man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Gustave Le Bon. At the core of human nature lies a paradox: the desire to be unique and the deep need to belong. Gustave Le Bon, in his groundbreaking work The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, was one of the first to analyze this contradiction, shedding light on the radical transformation of the individual when they become part of a crowd. What exactly is a crowd? We're not simply talking about a physical gathering of people. In the psychological sense, a crowd is a collective organism, a living entity with its own will, its own impulses, and, most importantly, a rationality entirely different from that of the individuals who compose it. This transformation doesn't only happen in stadiums, squares, or protest marches. Today, it also occurs in virtual spaces, in social networks, viral trends, and mass online movements that pull us in almost unconsciously. According to Le Bon, when an individual becomes part of a crowd, their conscious personality dissolves. Reason fades, and control is handed over to the subconscious. This process isn't always sudden or visible, it's more like a subtle erosion of critical thinking. The individual no longer thinks independently but begins to feel and react in harmony with the collective current. How does this transformation happen? Le Bon identifies three essential mechanisms behind this shift. Anonymity. In a crowd, the individual feels a loss of personal responsibility. They become absorbed into a faceless mass, which leads to a significant drop in self-awareness and moral accountability. Anonymity grants a kind of psychological immunity. Mental contagion, emotions, ideas, and behaviors spread with incredible speed within crowds. This contagion pushes individuals to adopt beliefs or actions they would normally reject outside the crowd. Suggestibility. Crowds become extremely susceptible to suggestion, especially from a dominant voice or charismatic leader. Logical reasoning is replaced by strong images and emotions. The crowd does not analyze, it reacts. The educated man becomes primitive in a crowd. One of Le Bon's most striking observations is that intelligence or education does not protect an individual from the influence of the crowd. The scholar and the laborer, the philosopher and the opportunist, all can act with equal impulsiveness when engulfed by the collective. It's not that they become the same, but that their higher cognitive functions are overwhelmed by the crowd's emotional momentum. In essence, the individual regresses to a simpler, more tribal form of behavior. Emotion over reason. Crowds think in absolutes. There is no room for nuance, subtlety, or critical reflection. Crowd psychology is emotional, not rational. It is driven by myths, symbols, slogans, or vivid images. The crowd is not in search of truth, it is in search of emotional certainty. Le Bon describes how a rumor or a manipulated image can rapidly incite a crowd to extreme reactions, either blind adoration or violent hatred. There is no middle ground. The spectrum of possible reactions narrows dramatically in favor of raw, immediate emotion. Responsibility disappears, impulse intensifies. One of the most dangerous effects of crowd psychology is the evaporation of personal responsibility. In place of individual judgment comes the collective impulse. An act that might seem immoral or outrageous to a person alone becomes perfectly acceptable within the crowd. This explains the chaos during riots, mass vandalism, or mob violence. People no longer feel they are themselves, they have become the crowd. A new type of intelligence, simpler, but more forceful. Le Bon argues that the crowd possesses a kind of collective intelligence, but it is not higher, it is lower, more instinctual. It is a type of reactive cognition, similar to the automatic responses of animals, driven by survival, emotion, and impulse. This collective intelligence is capable of quick decisions, but rarely wise ones. Why does this matter today? We live in an era where crowds are no longer only physical, they are digital. Social media amplifies every characteristic Le Bon described in the 19th century: emotional contagion, anonymity, impulsiveness, and suggestibility. A viral tweet or post can spark outrage, shift public opinion, or even destabilize governments. This is the power of the modern crowd. Understanding crowd psychology is no longer just an intellectual exercise, it is a survival skill. In a world where algorithms, influencers, and online mobs shape perception and behavior, the only defense is awareness. If we do not learn to recognize when we are thinking for ourselves versus when we are simply echoing the crowd, we risk losing our individuality, and with it, our freedom.